Welcome back to First Dollar Academy. I'm your host, Jeremy Mohue. It's officially been a month since we started releasing episodes, and I can't thank you enough for being there to support us and listen to all of the great information that we've been able to gather from so many different founders in so many different industries. And I can't wait to continue to deliver more information to you, the listener, about what it takes to start a business. This week, I'm joined by the CEO and founder of SavorWe, Alex Campbell. Alex has been a founder for a few years, but has really hit his stride here lately with both SavorWe and the Founders House. Alex comes from a business background and has always known that he wanted to be an entrepreneur, but there was a lot of things that Alex had to learn along the way. One being how grit and toughness can propel you to figure out what to do next. So listen to what Alex has to say about how his toughness has helped him build a business. Alex Campbell, welcome to First Dollar Academy. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Jeremy. Thanks for having me, man. Excited
We've been
about
we've been
this.
trying to get together for a long time,
I
man. I'm so
know.
glad that
I know.
we're finally able to do it.
It's fun though.
Um, for sure, and you have so much going on. I know that you have so much, knowledge to pass out. And the unique thing about you, Alex, is that you are running a business while also operating a kind of incubator for people to learn how to run their business. So you have so much to offer. Quickly, for those who don't know anything about you, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Alex Campbell. I'm the founder and CEO of SavorWe, and also one of the co-founders of Founder House. So SavorWe is a company marketplace where we connect chefs with customers. It started as like direct to consumer, and now we're creating communities around good food focused on the corporate realm. Bringing in chefs to do really engaging experiences compared to your normal like traditional happy hours and whatnot. And then on the Founder House side, that was the niche that we kind of realized in Chicago was lost post COVID. There really wasn't a place for founders to get together and do some things. So we came up with the idea to create Founder House, which is a community of founders in Chicago from early stage to later stage, really with the focus on building intentionality around conversations, helping each other out, and just creating great community to help, further the progress of everyone's companies, of everyone's who's involved.
Awesome. Yeah. So I got a chance to, stalk you a little bit. I know that you went to Marquette, not too far away from there. Tell me about
Yeah.
the early days and kind of how you got started. I know you ended up at Accenture and we're trying to figure out your way. So tell me a little bit about like young Alex, young man Alex,
Yeah,
and kind of
man.
how he got started.
Um, from a young age, I'll kind of give the backstory of food because it obviously relates to the company that I've been building now. Learned cooking from my mom when I was young, was always watching Emeril, recreating new things in the kitchen and just trying my hand at things. My cousin ended up becoming a chef. I wanted to follow in his footsteps, but ultimately kind of swayed away from that and went to Marquette originally for pre-med. Shoot for the stars, you'll still land on the moon.
Right.
So got through like chemistry. A teacher of mine actually told me, he's like, hey, this is not for you. I told him I'm going to retake his class and pass it, and then I'll drop it. So that's what I did. It was just kind of like I wanted to prove to myself that I could get to that point. But when that happened, it kind of offered up this new area of entrepreneurship, which was a new kind of major at Marquette at the time. So I was like, you know what, let's jump into that. It was really cool. Was pairing it with economics, which I ended up ultimately dropping and picking up finance for my second major. But entrepreneurship was just a really unique way to get kind of hands-on experience in both the corporate world. We did a lot of classes like with consulting for startups, but then actually creating an own startup on itself. So, minus food, also growing up, I grew up around tech. My mom was in sales at Cisco, and then my dad was at Motorola. Always on the forefront of the phone technology. So we kind of grew up with a lot of that. A lot of my cousins, my dad were engineers. So we were always kind of creating and tinkering around with things. So had the bug, knew I wanted to start something, didn't really know exactly what it was going to be. But in college, we ended up creating a company in our new venture creation class that I started called ClickPick. And that was kind of my first stab at entrepreneurship through like building a company. And basically what that was is we were taking the Facebook pictures and albums, and then you could stitch them together based on time and location and actually recreate a time slider view of an event. So the idea was you can relive moments of your life, 40 years from now. You can time slide all the way back and relive parties and big events and things like that. So we raised a little bit of cash. My good friend, in college, he was, in finance, so he was our CFO naturally, and then our other buddy was doing computer science, so he was obviously our CTO. We got like a working prototype up, but ultimately I was graduating, and my, dad and mom were both like, "Hey, you got a lot of good opportunities. We'll support you in anything what you want to do, but the rule is you got to go work for 3 years in corporate." So at the time, I was deciding between Bank of America and Accenture. Was going to take the job at Bank of America, and then my dad's like, "Hey, really consider this. Like, the nice thing about consulting is you'll touch on a bunch of different areas and learn a ton of different skill sets. Plus, there's just a expectation when you go in there that you have to perform." So yeah, that's what kind of brought me to Accenture, which I absolutely loved. I'm so happy that I went down that path. But overall, that's a bit of background of kind of where I went from there to Accenture, and then ultimately building into another company.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that background. It's so interesting, right? Because you see so many consultants, like you said, they touch so many areas of a business that
Yeah.
they get a sense of understanding. Could you talk a little bit about things that you learned that are helping you like right now
Yeah.
when you were just like doing, you're doing the consulting thing?
Yeah, man. Grit. Like I do believe a lot of people are just you're born with grit and resiliency, but I do think it can be a learned tactic. And that was one thing at Accenture that you had to hop on the flights, 5:36 in the morning, land, go to client site. Sometimes you're working until 2, 3 in the morning. So you're kind of jamming 70 hours of work in 4 days. But if you didn't perform, you were off. So I think for me, it was like I joined, learned a ton, was fortunate enough to be actually on a startup within the firm where we were doing a mobile app for mega farms. So we were measuring like kind of crop yield analysis and things like that. So I was able to try a bunch of different things, which is a little unheard of for analysts joining. But like shout out to a couple of my mentors, one who actually I've been fortunate enough to catch back up with as he left and he's now starting his own company, or he's been working on it for a while. But I think just a lot of grit and kind of the resiliency of like, hey, you're going to have to do stuff you don't want to do. But ultimately at the end of the day that's what's going to separate you from everyone else. It's the people that can get in there, work the long hours, it's not ideal. You're not going to like it, but ultimately at the end, like it proves to those around you that, hey, this is someone we can count on. And then organization. I mean, that place was, email comes in, you're responding with your expectation is respond within an hour. So it just kind of taught me a lot of like fundamentals that, I don't know if I would have learned anywhere else. I'm sure I would in some aspect, but I do believe it's helped me a lot as I've built out, is just being able to stay organized, because it's been, mostly a one-man show for most of the time. And you kind of got to like wear a bunch of different hats, but then also realize like don't fall into certain kind of traps, and prioritization was key in a lot of that.
And it's really interesting, right? So you're building these skills as you're kind of going along. You make the deal with your parents 3 years. So let's fast back or go back to 2.5 years in, right? You got 6 months left with the deal for your parents, and I'm sure you're thinking about what you're going to do next. How'd you end up?
Yeah.
How'd you end up on, mixing technology and food and coming up with the idea for SavorWe?
Yeah, man. So there's kind of two parts to that. The first is like had the agreement with my parents. that I honestly think they forgot about. But there was the other part that while I was working, I made like a life goal that by 26, I was going to quit and either join a startup or start something on my own. Like I had no idea it was going to be food related. I just knew like, it's time for me to kind of jump into the deep end and see what happens. So my birthday is May 14th. This would have been February. And like January, February, I'm kind of like, all right, I'm done. Like I'm going to start interviewing. So I interviewed at a couple startups, and honestly, they were like, absolutely not. We're not bringing a consulting in. Like that's not the mindset we want in the startup environment, all these things. And it's funny because now everyone wants, people who work in 80 plus hours and just kind of grinding on things. But I'm not gonna lie, like it definitely dinged my ego a bit because I was like, man, like I worked at this great firm, but I can't find a job at a startup. And on top of that, my project got extended till September. So I was in this kind of double whammy of like, man, I'm missing, this whole thing on my birthday and all these pieces. And, fast forward a couple weeks, I was talking to my dad. I'm like, I'm done. He's like, you made an agreement. You have to stick to that agreement. And I was like, absolutely. Walked into the office and they literally canceled all consulting projects. So like they rolled everyone off the project. Wow. This was like March-ish time frame. A couple weeks later, I was going on a trip to Thailand with some buddies of mine. Did Thailand, talked to some friends, kind of had these whole things, and ultimately came back from that trip and quit my job and didn't really know where I was going yet. But interesting is like I read an article about this guy doing these dinner parties in New York. So I started toying around with the idea originally with a buddy of mine who was at Accenture and was like, hey, like, what do you think about in-home cooking classes? And kind of had this idea, my mentor was like, don't like, if you're going to quit, let's talk first. So they ended up giving me like a year leave of absence to go try this all out. And part of that, honestly, I believe was just because I worked very hard in everything that I did. But it gave me this runway to kind of be like I wasn't getting paid, but I got my insurance covered, which is huge. So I was like, all right, like, what are we going to do? So I started with, talking with this with a buddy. In-home cooking classes was the play. It's August of 2018 at the time. And like, he calls me, he's like, hey man, I'm traveling from Boston to Ireland with projects on the firm. Like, I just don't have the bandwidth. So I was like, so that was kind of my first like shit moment. And I'm like, you know what? We just got to keep pushing. So, eventually it just started where I was like, all right, what are we going to do? Let's see if we can get people to show up for in-home cooking classes. So I started teaching these to like friends at first in my apartment building with two of my buddies. They would be helping out. People would come over. I was teaching like spaghetti and meatballs, and they're kind of like, this is amazing. Do you have, can you come in and cook for me? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I started cooking for a few friends of friends, and I'm like, man, there should be a marketplace for this. And obviously upon research, I realized there has been attempts at it. I was kind of like, you know what, if we focus on this experiential piece, I really think we can drive some things there. So that's how it all started, and we got into it. I started teaching, these classes, and then I onboarded some chefs in like 2019, raised, 100,000 to go build out this mobile app. And then COVID hit, which was definitely a tailwind for us, but we were able to like go through and build the app through that time frame and refine the process and launched everything, at the end of that year.
And I'm so interested to hear about like, you mentioned at the beginning of the call, like your you grew up around food, like your family, you have family members who were chefs and things like that. And, it's so interesting. I've worked in so many different types of restaurants, from fine dining to, chicken shacks and all these things. And
Yeah.
the number one thing that you hear is, don't start a food business. Don't start a food business. Like there's so much involved. It's really high. It's really hard to make, great margins.
Yeah.
So, when you, knowing all this, because I'm sure you knew it, what kind of gave you that confidence to like just leap forward? Was it those dinner parties and everyone loving it, or did you have that support system, or what gave you that confidence?
I didn't realize how hard it was to actually build a business. So like the one piece of advice is like going into things, understanding that this is extremely hard. Like, you are going to face bouts of depression and bouts of happiness and like all the different motions in between. So I just think I was like cocky and like, I'm like, there's no way this will fail. Like, this thing's going to be huge. I'm going to be selling it in 3 years, be, 30 under 30, like all this stuff. And a quick segue for a second is I want to tell a story where I realized like, oh shit, this is like really real. Was going through this, was like, I'm ready to roll. And my first meeting I had with a developer was out in New York. And I bought this custom suit in Thailand for like $100. I have this thing on, I'm flying, I'm doing a day trip to New York. I'm like, I'm the man. Like, I'm 26. I'm like, oh, this is amazing, blah, 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 blah. I get there, show up to the office. The guy's like, why are you in a suit? And I'm like, oh my God, this is it. I mean, he said some explicits behind it, but he was like giving me some shit. And I'm kind of like, man, okay, welcome to the real world. And then he proceeded to have this amazing lunch with me where he just explained like, hey, majority of founders get way too caught up in their ego and not actually on execution. And they flaunt on, the amounts that are raised and not actually understanding the business, right? And I think I took a lot of that to heart. And, on top of that, was able to have some great, input and advice from my dad and even my mom. Like, they gave me a ton of support and be like, hey, you can go do this. But we built the business in a way so it's not like your traditional restaurant. Everything's mobile. We have no overhead. We have no kind of employees. Everyone's contractors. So like, we're doing 50% margins on things right now. And we fluctuate between 30 to 50 depending on what the event is. And ultimately, you kind of see that, hey, you can build on a base that's kind of like old school. And I think what COVID did was really poke a hole in like the fundamental thinking of restaurants and, how people want to experience these types of, dining experiences. And I think you'll have restaurants that will stay in the old way, and that's completely fine. And I love restaurants. I love going out to eat. I don't think, there's a way like we're technically competing per se. But I think our offering is much simpler. Like, it's really geared towards the experiential aspect of like what people want without all of kind of the BS of the overhead and staffing and everything else that comes with it. Right. So, I think that understanding that and then just having like the support of friends and family, really did help me. When we first launched, I had my friends that were booking experiences. I got like the first experience my buddy booked, he actually didn't tip, and I'm like, dude, what the hell's wrong with you? We just brought it up last week and we saw each other, we were really laughing about it. But I just think that support was kind of like what I needed in the time, and honestly, that's been what's got me through. It's like being able to fall back on the fundamentals, being able to fall back and be like, hey, we've been here before. We can grind through this. Like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. You just got to keep going. Just remember the business fundamentals, and you can, really achieve what you're trying to set out to achieve.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you so much for that story. I know there's so many people that probably have had the experience where they have friends and family that participate, and maybe they don't do exactly what they want to do.
Like, dude, what the hell, man? Like, wouldn't you tip at a restaurant? He's like, it's not a restaurant. And I'm like, all right, here we go.
So tell me a little bit about, you talked a little bit about how you're connecting custom experiences with custom food, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. You kind of touched on it with COVID and how we really kind of had to rethink how we do food and how we do experiences. And I'm so curious to hear about, from a consumer side, the value prop, because I can set this up for my friends and my family. We can have such a great time here at my home or somewhere that I pick, and we can pick a fun menu and all these things. But there's the other side of that, which are the chefs and the people that are actually making the food. And so like I said, it's a marketplace. So you need those people to thrive and really bring that experience out.
Yeah.
How did you find those people? How did you convince those chefs to get on board, and really start this thing up?
Yeah, man. A lot of cold outreach. and a lot of like, hey, here's this idea. And honestly, I probably went on LinkedIn and DM 200 chefs in like 2019. And I got like four that were like, I'm interested. And I'm like, what? Okay. Like, this is a sweet idea. I was like, all right, that's awesome. Um, but honestly, with COVID, once it hit, and like the thing I wanted to set out too is, a big proponent of this is being able to provide chefs with that work-life balance. But then also, they make so much more money than they would at like a shift in the restaurant, like in one experience. And like even if you combine prep, like let's say it's 3 to 4 hours of prep, hour of travel time, and then 2.5, 3 hours on site, like you're 8 hours and you're making probably 7 to 8 times more than what you would have made that night in the restaurant, depending on obviously your pay and stuff. I'm going kind of into that route, but you sit there and you kind of like understand the other piece of chefs is they do want to be seen. Like they want to be the person in the room. Like, they might get their idea heard in kind of a staff meeting and it shows up on the menu, but it's the executive chef's menu. So, Jeremy, you could be coming up with a great idea, but if John's the executive chef, everyone will think it's John's dish. And some chefs are great and they give credit to where credit's due, others don't. So I think for me, it was just kind of like explaining that, like, hey, we're trying to help put more cash in your pocket. And I think the issue at that time, especially during COVID, is a lot of people were looking at, your DoorDashes and your Uber and all that is kind of like taking advantage of. And, for us, we really wanted to try and stay clear. So like we went through a lot of different pricing restructures for chefs. We're still going through and figuring out what is that exact piece. It's great where we're at right now, but I'm always trying to figure out like what's ways we can get the chefs paid more, while we create the returns we were trying to create as well. So it really was like the first four chefs were kind of, hey, you're in. And then once COVID hit, the floodgates opened. Like even now we can drop a posting for a chef and we're getting tons of responses to that. You're like, hey, I'd love to join. I'd love to join. I'd love to join. Now everyone can't. We actually go through and vet each chef individually. But it's a different world now. Like the chefs, there's so much more kind of like gig economy that's coming up. And a lot of the chefs that were in industry have started realizing like they can extend their reach with TikTok and Instagram and start creating personal brands for themselves. And I think if you can pair that with this whole idea of, IRL community, like people want real life experiences. They want to be with people. It puts us at a really, really unique time in history when it comes to food, right? So I think we're able to capture on like a lot of those pieces, but a big piece of that is having the chefs, and then as supply grows, they're happy because it's like, man, I'm getting paid for doing 2 gigs a week more than I'm making. I could have made like a month, right? So I just think, and obviously it depends on the gig size and stuff, but I just think that's kind of an important piece too. And I keep coming back to community, but it's the whole piece. It's like, how do you build this community around great food? And like everything you've done in life, maybe not everything, but 90% of the things that happen that are great or something, there is some aspect of food. It's communal. Like it's in everything. Like it's whatever, it's always on people's minds because they got to eat. It's the one thing that can't be destroyed by AI. Like AI is not going to cook for you. Maybe eventually with like robots, sure, but like I'm hoping we can cash out before then, or we build on top of that trend when it comes. But I just think food's a great moat, and like you build food and community in this kind of new world as we're emerging. Because I don't think everyone's out of COVID yet. Like I think everyone's still figuring out like how do you interact again. And how do you create these more, unique experiences? And that's where we can come in with these chefs who are extremely creative and be like, hey, let's do tequila and tapas pairing with a DJ. I don't, just stuff like that. And you can kind of start like mirroring all these different pieces together.
Right. And, you're seeing kind of trends across different industries. I'm seeing a lot on social media of like, DJs,
Yeah.
performing in people's kitchens and
Yeah.
like backyards, and chefs going to people's houses and providing like a really fine dining experience.
Yeah.
Your business is really unique because you want to try to really match the guests' preferences with the menu, right? And try to
Yeah.
figure out unique ways to do that. I really like the technology behind it. Could you talk a little bit about like the software you use to really extract that data from the user so they can really be blended with like the best experience?
Yeah. So, we have 5 years of data of what people have been eating. And understanding that data, we're able to actually start like curating recommendations. Like we haven't really pushed this out yet, but we started playing around with this idea of food bites. And basically that is, a machine learning model for recommendations based on preferences. Where ultimately we're going to start being able to like, hey, you have 30 people in this event. We can curate the exact event that's, needed based on food. And then obviously, hopefully being able to leverage like different partners in the ecosystem that are building in Chicago. There's like Pi, what Andy Dunn's doing like is awesome with in real life community. And I think there's ways that this can merge in there. And then I think there's, dating clubs that are starting up that we can get involved in. And I think, a buddy of mine's doing this company Base, and it's like, you can start building into these communities that using AI and really start tailoring like really unique experiences that every single person there would be like, wow, that's cool. Like there's something for me in that. So that's what we're, kind of going through those iterations now. And then the other piece is just using, tons of market research from kind of corporate and clients like that, just understanding like, what do you guys want? Like, what is it that, we did an event last week, and a very simple thing. We just did we did really cool apps. It was, kind of interactive and experience, but we passed the appetizers out, and there's adding that hospitality flair when normally like they came back, they were like, we're used to just a buffet. So like even that touch is like you're mixing in hospitality with tech, and you start kind of creating this whole piece. And, like the mobile app we built out, we're in the process of redoing, kind of relaunching our website. That's going to be a lot more kind of like interactive. But it's all automated. Like you book an experience, you see the menus that are on there, you go through, and that same piece is going to be mimicked in just a different way, more geared towards kind of this new slight rebrand of what we're building out for SavorWe.
Absolutely. I would be remiss if I did not. You're in Chicago, and you have a company that produces food, and the biggest show in Hulu's history, The Bear, right, is really centered around how you prepare these fine dishes and things like that. Are you seeing a shift in your consumer base for the urge to have like unique dishes, unique types of food, especially with all the things that are going around in Hollywood?
That's a good question. I think it's a mixed bag. I think you have consumers who are very into kind of the fine dining scene, and they really want to have kind of like push the limits of stuff and see. We have a great partnership with the local chef, Donald Young, and he does a lot of really, really cool fine dining, but he's such a chill guy. Like I met him and had coffee. He's just like laid back, like such a great dude. So we're able to offer up like really cool, like we did an interactive kind of appetizer experience where he brought in like liquid nitrogen and did Dippin' Dots, and everyone there, like, I'm sure some people in there had been fine dining, but they didn't experience it like that. Like it was at this event space, and we're sitting there, and everyone's used to like, oh, we're going to another dinner where we got to sit next to the same four people. It's like, no, we're doing liquid nitrogen Dippin' Dots on top of duck waffles. That's like at the bar that you can see. And I think it's, people want that, but we're also kind of creating that whole piece of like the excitement factor around the food. And then I think the other piece is like people want just the experience. Like you could like, we have people that are out there that's like, man, the chef made grilled cheese, but he cooked it in my home, right? So I think there's like that whole piece too, where it's like there's a wow factor around it, where it's, a private chef is no longer for the elite, right? Like we're trying to make it for everyone to have that experience, whether it's through your corporate events or, private in home, right? So I think the shift, to answer your question, is going more towards just the experiential food piece. And I don't really think it matters. Like obviously it matters on quality of food that's being eaten, but it's more about like, wow, that was an experience. And on top of that, the food was really great.
That's great, and I'm so happy to hear like you are meeting the needs of so many different types of consumers to kind of expand that base.
Yeah.
Touching really quickly on kind of the administrative side of running a marketplace, right? So you built this marketplace. You have chefs, you have people who want these experiences, and we all have used Uber, Lyft, or all these different apps. What goes on behind the curtain that we don't know about? Could you tell me like a story of something that you've dealt with that you're like, wow, I had no idea this would be like operating a marketplace like this.
Yeah. I mean, I have a bunch. I'm going to tell my first story because it was literally the day we launched. Um, we literally launched and you actually couldn't purchase a service because we had a test API in our Stripe that like I was like, oh my god, okay, so that was like just a small hookup, like where I'm like whatever. Like from the pure marketplace, I mean it's crazy. Like you got to have. I understand why these companies raised hundreds of millions of dollars to get eyeballs because ultimately that is what you need. But I think that's because it's direct to consumer. And that's why like we've taken our data and realized like, yes, we still have the D2C piece, but doing a lot more of these larger scale events is really what creates this kind of waterfall effect on things. I think from like an admin standpoint, my Mondays, like for the first 2 hours of the day is just pure admin work. So it's like following up on any open invoices if we have any, like making sure things are running smoothly. I think there were like a lot of app bugs in the beginning. Now it's kind of like everything's stabilized, and you have to always evolve to meet what your consumers' demands are, right? So like when we were just focused strictly on D2C, we had people emailing us like, hey, we've seen the same menus, right? So you're like, oh shit, like we need to have 10 more menus up there because we need to give people a variety, right? And I think the other piece to the marketplace is people don't actually want a ton of choices. So I know I'm kind of going back on that last statement, but like there's a way where you can help them decide. So you get into this whole like psychology of thinking of like, okay, well, how does the consumer act? You know, it's a marketplace that's new, right? Like, yes, it's been tried, but you think of Uber, like no one ever thought they would get into the car with a stranger, even though they did it with cabs. But it's just kind of the whole thing of like ordering from its phone. And I think for us, it's kind of like, no one thought they could have experiences anywhere, right? Whether it's in your office, at your home, on a boat, whatever that looks like. I think ultimately just the behind the scenes piece, you're just something new is happening probably every week where you're just, and especially now, like information is vastly available. Now you have this whole rise of AI and everyone's trying to be AI and like, how do you mimic that and jump into it? But I think the other thing this has taught me is like swim your lane. Like you're going to find a bunch of different opportunities. And I've had to do that just because, we didn't raise tons of money. But we were able to kind of like generate revenue and hit profitability and do all these things where it's kind of like, hey, okay, like this is our focus now. And now we're joining this new thing where if you just talk to people, they tell you what they want. And then you just kind of build from there. And I think at the beginning, I was more like, this is how the app needs to be. This is how this company needs to be. And like when you let off the reins a little bit and let people like really be like, hey, this would be cool if this. And then you collect that data and realize out of 100 people, 20 of them said that. You probably have something you should look at in the marketplace piece. And I just think from there, like it's hard. I go back to like when I launched the website and I literally have a picture. I'm like, fingers up, like number one. And like, I'm like, dude, we're going to have 20,000 downloads in the first week. And like, we had 2. I'm like, oh my God, like what is going on? So I think just that whole expectation setting has been, a constant roller coaster where you really learn a lot, but you can't learn unless you just jump into the deep end and see what happens. Right.
Absolutely. And it's so funny because, you talk a little bit about, all of the elements that go into some of the things that you do. I really want to quickly touch in on, the second thing that you started. And it just dawned on me as we're talking, your experience as a consultant is really kind of interesting because you have so many other people that you can learn from. You have all these big companies. You're competing on projects, making sure that you're delivering for the customers. You started SavorWe before you started Founders House,
Yeah.
and I imagine somewhere along the way you realize like I know I can't be the only one going through this.
Yeah.
I want to start like a community of people to kind of learn from. Tell
Yeah.
me about that like experience and how you decided to do it, and then you have so many different types of people in your program there. How were you able to like get them on board?
Yeah. Yeah. During COVID, I actually tried to start a group like this, and we had like 5 people. 2 I'm still in contact with. One just raised a good round, so it's fun how that works out. But I just saw kind of the decline in entrepreneurial engagement in Chicago, and on top of that, just like the typical network events you go to, you're just meeting the same people, or you're meeting people that aren't really providing any value, and everyone's a lot more transactional. So a buddy of mine, Jack and I, this was last year. Yeah, beginning of last year, we sat down and had drinks just to catch up, like using growth marketing. I was like, hey, maybe we can engage you in growth marketing. And he's like, yeah, dude, we're like 250K. I'm like, all right, maybe we can't do that. So it's like, what else? Then we started talking and riffing on this idea of like, let's get founders together. So we decided to do, kind of our first dinner. We got 6 founders, and a buddy Osa, Reno, and some other Nico and some other guys were there. It was kind of like, all right, how do we build this, right? And we just kind of left it as is, and we had these, kind of weekly calls. But I just really started getting behind of like, no, this has to happen. Like we need to get people going, and like slowly each month was like, all right, I threw out an email. I'm like, hey guys, we're gonna meet here. Whoever shows up, and it is a no bullshit. We don't really talk about work. It's how can I help you? We riff on anything ideas that you need help on, like things like that. But it's all in this just like atmosphere of, dude, walls are down, man. Like we all know how hard this is. So like, be open. It's okay. People can help you. And it's like, it was so cool seeing like each event, more people showed up and more people were like connecting and helping. And I was like, dude, this is awesome. Like this is exactly how it is. And then, me, Reno, Osa, kind of made it official beginning of this year, end of last year. One thing that popped into my mind was it was November, and I'm like, man, everyone else gets a Christmas party but founders. Like no one gets a holiday party because it's usually in the early stage. You're either by yourself or you have another employee, and it's like, yeah, sure, you go out and grab some drinks and like woohoo. I was like, we need to throw a holiday party for free for founders. And that was like December. We had, end of November, like 3 weeks. We're like, let's just do this thing and see what happens. So we ended up pulling it together. Got some sponsors, and through like 150 people showed up, and it was sweet. We had like a DJ, a Santa Claus, like all this stuff, and like food, and it was just really unique. And everyone there was like, man, this is awesome. What is this? And that was kind of like, hey, this is Founder House. Like this is the community, built by founders for founders, come join us. We're going to help, blah, 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 blah. And it just kind of took legs from there. And this year it's been very much like, we send out a type form and people just refer. So it started as, kind of, hey, we're just getting together and shooting the shit, to now, like we did a Cubs game last month and had 30 founders show up for the bleachers, which was awesome. Like that was just a cool experience. And there's no agenda. Like there isn't, we're not trying to make cash. We're not trying to do anything like that. We're literally trying to facilitate great conversations. And honestly, for me, people talk about filling their cup, and this is part of the way that I fill my own cup. Is I do thoroughly enjoy, curating things and helping people. To everyone's surprise, I actually don't spend that much time on it. It's kind of like, an hour to 2 hours, my Sunday time. But it brings joy, and I think people need to realize, you shouldn't be out to network. You should be out to build community and trust, and really understand that like by you talking to someone and seeing how you can help them, that's going to pay dividends. It might not be immediate, but years down the road. So I think operating with that in mind, it's just really been an easy thing to do. And it gives people something to do, and it gives people new ways to connect in ways that, and it's only founders. Like, we don't, and no one else can come in. If you're not a founder, you can't make it. Like, it's just, even if you're part-time, like, no, you got to be full-time in the trench, at least battled your first cycle of depression. No, I'm just kidding. But like, you got to be in there, because it's just a different world, right? And like, I know as you're getting this stuff started up, you get it. Like, it's just kind of, you're out there figuring out, like, all right, where am I going? What am I doing? How's it happening? Type of thing. So.
Absolutely. And you're so unique, Alex, because you know that you've always wanted to be a founder. You know that you've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And it's becoming really popular, right? You see it on social media, and it's definitely being glamorized as the thing to do. But increasingly, we're seeing so many big companies become bigger. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's so much harder to get started, mm-hmm. To try to build your own business. The funding apparatus, it seems a little bit broken, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have anything to do with AI, we're not going to fund you.
Yeah.
And now you've started this Founders House. What are some of the trends you're seeing, or some of the things that are giving you hope to continue on and make sure that you're nurturing other founders and this community to help build?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I'm extremely long on Chicago. Like, I grew up in the suburbs from around here, spent time coming into the city growing up. I see a lot of great things happening, and I think, to your point on the fundraising, I believe it's a two-way street. I think on the founder side, I don't think enough of us know how to tell the right story to get fundraising, and then we blame the investor. But then on the investor side, I do think there's, more so in Chicago, we need a lot more early stage capital coming into play. And I think, this is much more of kind of a private equity space type of play. And I think a lot of VCs do think like that. Even they say they're early stage, they're much more inclined to invest later on. So I think knowing that there's a lot of different groups and a lot of different people that share the same sentiment, we're seeing funds that are starting to spring up, or ideas of funds that are really like, hey, early stage focus. It makes me happy. And then I think you have these late stage founders that you really need to bring to the top. Like, we need to support the people that are already winning, and you got to support the ones who want to build and build huge. Like, I don't know where our company is going to be. Like, obviously I think it can be $100 million company as we expand to stuff, but it's one of those things for me where it's like, man, there's a lot of greatness. To the same point, I do also think there's a lot of, and I'm stealing this from my buddy Samir. He brought this up in a fireside chat. Was like, one of the issues with Chicago is there are too many wantrepreneurs. Like, there's people that say they're entrepreneurs, but they're building 5 different things. And I think there's a fine line between like, hey, I'm hustling to make some money while this other thing's not going, compared to like, no, I have 5 different companies I'm trying to raise cash for. I don't know where the idea is. And he actually sat me down, and he's like, you need to be selfish with your time. And I think being able to just like give that out to people and be like, hey, like, don't show up to everything. Like, be selfish with your time. Like, don't always say yes. It helps really kind of refine that process. So like, even these small conversations, it's like, I want to tell people that I meet, like, hey, you're overextending. Like, don't do this. Do that, try that. Like, I've seen this. Oh, by the way, here's like 8 people you can talk to and kind of help you with that vision. But I think we're just in a really good inflection point in Chicago where I think there's a lot of hype, and frothiness a little bit, but there's a strong foundation being built underneath that where, all that's going to rise, and, all boats kind of rise with the tide to an extent. And there's going to be some boats that sink. But I think that's a question you got to ask yourself, because at the end of the day, 90% of what happens to you is the person looking back at you in the mirror, and the other 10% can be external forces for sure. So I think just like with that in mind, and being so long on Chicago, and like seeing the trends of, people really do want to work hard. The right ones do. They should have a place where they can be helped, and they should be able to have access to network. And I think that's why Chicago is cool too, because it is such a small, large city where you really can tap into these network right now of like later stage founders, people who have exited, and like, you'll get coffee with them. It's like, just do the cold outreach and see what happens. Because at the end of the day, worst that's going to happen is a no. But that conversation could happen and it changes your life on something. So I just think like everything's coming together, and I'm really excited for where Chicago's going and where it's headed. And I just think we need a couple really big wins, and the rest will be history on things. So it's like, it's any way to be a part of that, I think brings me joy and kind of gives me the motivation to keep pushing and kind of be part of the history.
Absolutely. And you're saying more cities, Austin here in Dallas, Chicago. You're seeing more cities, creating some type of element
Yeah,
to really support small businesses.
yeah,
And you don't need to be in Silicon Valley to
totally,
start something big. So that's
100%.
really great to hear.
There's genius everywhere.
Exactly.
There is.
And so I really want to ask you a little bit. I know you just talked a little bit about Chicago, but I wanted to go back to kind of your thoughts about growth, right? So I noticed that although you primarily operate in Chicago, there are a couple other cities that you are, whether you're doing like pop-ups
Yeah.
or providing the full service. I'm so curious how you got there, right? Because oftentimes we are doing what we need to be doing. You're turning a profit. You're getting great reviews. Your customers are having a really great time. When do you know it's like time to expand? When do you know it's time to go to a different city and try to kind of replicate the success that you've had in Chicago?
Yeah. So the cities we're in now, we launched because we just saw an opportunity. We're like, all right, let's try kind of like Minnesota, for example. In Minneapolis, we're like, all right, let's see what happens in a secondary market. Like, can we kind of have higher downloads and app usage when the market's smaller and there's kind of that not penetration going on, right? You don't have to penetrate millions of people. You have 500,000. And I think down in Miami was things were parlaying on our, like, kind of the boat side of things. So we just really opened up shop down there. But to be completely honest with you, like right now I have, a new thought process on how it goes. And a lot of this is thanks to, kind of another mentor of mine who I met a few months ago through another friend. And his focus and what kind of told me is like, hey, you need to set an EBITDA number that you can get to before you launch the next market. Because you have to think, how long did it take you to launch the first one? And even if you half that, you still have to put all that effort in. So like right now, we really did this whole kind of like, hey, let's soul search and just see where we're at. And now like our plan moving forward, like I'm not going to get into full details, but it's along the lines of that, where it's like, okay, we're in the black right now. How do we keep on moving that needle forward? And then from there, like we have all these other cities kind of like circled of where we'll go. But a lot of it comes of like, hey, are we going to go raise a growth round in a year? Or are we going to control our destiny and kind of grow a little slower and, gobble up market share that way? So I think, like, to answer your question, the first one was like I was growing to try and grow revenue because we didn't raise a bunch of cash, and it worked at times and it didn't at others. Now it's much more of like we have a process of, hey, we're getting Chicago up and rolling, and those contacts are going to leverage us into other ones. But the plan will be, grow in a smart way, in a smart fashion, and not in the traditional. Before it was grow at all costs, right? Now we didn't have the luxury of millions and millions of dollars in the bank, but we still had that mindset. So I was like, all right, let's rethink this of like, how does a sustainable business grow? How does that happen? And then once that starts getting going, then you're like, okay, cool. You have a business that's generating money and that can generate returns that can pay for other kind of pieces of the business to succeed. So I think it's just kind of rewiring that thinking. I know it's not like the full answer to your question, but that's just kind of the thought process behind everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And I appreciate that because I think so many people, when they start a business in their town or their city, they don't have any dreams past just being successful there. But then you have to understand there are other opportunities elsewhere.
Totally.
So I want to wrap with something related to just advice, right?
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about grit, right, in your consulting days, and and just trying to get out there and meet the customer's needs. And you talked about community and how important it is to kind of learn and grow from other things. What are some, absolute must-haves you have to have as an individual to be a successful business owner, entrepreneur?
I mean, I think you got to be determined. You really have to. You have to be determined and believe in yourself. Like a lot of people are going to be. They'll hate on your idea. They're like, this is shit. Like, it's not going to work. And you're going to get a ton of that because in their realm of thinking, it doesn't work. So I think just like believing in yourself and having that thought process of like, hey, I can do this. And like leaning on yourself in the darkest moments. Because it does. It gets hard. Like, I know I keep saying that, but it is really hard. And like, I've talked to founders that are 20 times further than I am. And they're like, yeah, the problems don't change. They just get bigger. So you have to be able to have like your internal kind of support system working. And for me, it's like, you stick to a routine. Like I've gotten out of shape and like all these things where I'm like, I just don't feel good about myself. And it definitely bleeds into not only like personal life, but work life. So it's like create a routine and stick to it. Right. So like, I get up in the morning, I stretch, I journal, I kind of like do some menial tasks, and then I dive into everything. It's like, all right, how do we work? How do we go? But yeah, I just think if you believe in yourself, like good things will happen, and you just have to have like trust that you're on the right path. Now, if the writing's on the wall, like you have to accept that fate too. And that's also just another piece. It's like learn when to stop. But you'll know deep in your soul, like if you're supposed to stop at that point. And I think the other thing is just learn. Like one book I'd recommend that I just finished reading is Your Next 5 Moves by Patrick Bet-David. And like, it's amazing. It's a great book to read. I would say for anyone, but especially if you're kind of like starting out and early on, it reframes like kind of some of the ways that you think, and ultimately just be a good person, man. Like if you're a good human, good things happen. Don't be an asshole. No one really wants to be around an asshole, and there's plenty of assholes out there. And yes, they'll be successful. Yes, they'll be further along than you are, but they're still an asshole, and you can still be a nice person and make things happen. So I think that's kind of the advice I'd give in that, to get like a little more detailed, like understand your numbers. Like I don't think a lot of founders know their numbers. Be married to your numbers. That was a struggle for me. Like my dad beat that to my head. He's like, you need to know your numbers. And, that's kind of like that piece where I would say, but yeah, just believe in yourself and enjoy the journey. Like I'm 32 and I tell myself like, man, like, oh, this is so long. It's like, yeah, dude, you're 32 though. Like there's so much more life to be had and lived that like good things are coming. You just got to kind of grind in this moment and realize that like, all right, this is what I signed up for. It's like when you think about that moment to complain, it's like take the 5 minutes, do whatever you need to do about it, and then figure out like, all right, what am I going to do next? How am I going to fix this issue? Because there's always going to be problems. So I mean, be a good human, believe in yourself and just keep trucking because you got something good. Only you are going to believe in it. And then everyone will be like, oh my God, you're so successful. It's like, dude, you have no idea. But yeah,
That's
so
awesome. There you have it. Be a good human.
yeah,
Work hard and think good things will happen.
yeah,
Hey,
man.
Alex, where can people find you?
So I'm actually off Instagram, but you can find me on LinkedIn for sure. It's just Alex Campbell 19. But yeah, man, Chicago, Fulton Market, baby, always there. Reach out if you ever want to grab a coffee or chat. Like I'm always happy to help people in any way that I can.
Absolutely. And the SavorWe application is downloadable, and you can go find those experiences as well. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time, Alex. Really
awesome,
appreciate
dude.
you.
Appreciate it, Jeremy. Thanks, man.
A big thank you to Alex Campbell for joining us on today's episode. We were so happy to have him. And of course, you can reach Alex on all of the links on the show notes. And hey, we want to hear from you at First Dollar Academy. We actually have a survey that we want you to fill out to help ask some of the questions that you've been burning to ask all of these founders. And it's a short survey linked to the bottom of this episode. Take a couple minutes, fill it out, and hopefully we can ask some of the questions that you've been wanting to know. Until next time, thanks so much.